Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister is weighing in on a decision by China's top court to overturn a death sentence for Canadian Robert Lloyd Schellenberg in a drug smuggling case.
I have raised this case several times with our Chinese counterparts. In terms of decisions that they are making internally, I do not have visibility on the reasons that they undertake particular decisions. And similarly, they would not have visibility as to government decisions that we are making as a matter of domestic law. I can say that I am pleased with this development, and I look forward to continuing to advocate for Canadian consular cases around the world.
Schellenberg was detained on drug charges in 2014. He was initially given 15 years in prison in 2018, but China retried him the following year and sentenced him to death. That was a month after Canadian authorities detained Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou on a warrant from the U.S. Global Affairs Canada says it's aware of the court's decision and will continue to provide consular services to Schellenberg and his family. The ruling comes after Prime Minister Mark Carney visited China last month to boost trade ties. Michael Kovrig, a former Canadian diplomat who was detained by China for more than 1,000 days between 2018 and 2021, joins us now to share his thoughts. Mr. Kovrig, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
What is your initial reaction to this decision by China?
It's a very important step in the right direction. This is exactly the kind of progress that we've been hoping for. And I think it's always hard to know whether Canadian diplomacy contributed to it. But I think it is a credit to the Canadian government that it continues to quietly raise consular cases like Mr. Schellenberg's. And that advocacy and stabilization of relations and opening of diplomatic channels to the highest level is certainly influential. But ultimately, the decision is with China's Supreme People's Court.
Really, how political do you think that this decision was, with it coming in light of Canada's trade deal with China?
So my impression is that the initial decision back in 2018 was probably not political, or at least not obviously so. But then there was a fairly blatant politicization in 2018 when his appeals process had the unfortunate timing of coinciding with the arrest of Meng Wanzhou in Canada, and of course my own arbitrary detention and hostage taking. In Mr. Schellenberg's case, I think he was instrumentalized in that. But of course, it's not possible to prove that. What we can hope now is that his case has finally moved to the Supreme People's Court, as is possible in the Chinese process, and it's overturned the previous ruling. He still now faces a new trial, and we can hope that the Chinese system is relatively compassionate and benevolent and fair, and gives him a more reasonable sentence that's more in line with the original sentence, or even ideally a more humane outcome for him. We should all hope for that. The situation that he's been in for years now would have been incredibly stressful and very difficult for him.
What do you think this move signals about where the relationship between Canada and China is right now?
So the Chinese government, particularly the Chinese Communist Party, uses all elements of its system to send signals. And in early 2025, for example, China executed 4 Canadian citizens who were on death row. That was, whether deliberately or not, there was no effort to stop that from happening in their system. And so this, I think, can be taken as a positive signal that China now wants relations with Canada to move on to a smoother track. So that's generally a positive thing, but we have to be mindful always when dealing with the Chinese government that anything is a potential weapon. So things that are used positively to signal that relations are moving in a direction China likes can also very quickly be suddenly turned against Canada or any other country that deals with China.
Given your experience, how do you imagine Mr. Schellenberg and his family are feeling?
I would imagine that they're now more hopeful than they would have been before. But let's be clear, he still has another hurdle ahead of him with a trial. And I think all of our hopes should be with them that they get the best possible outcome for Robert and he can come home to Canada as soon as possible. There are a number of possible outcomes, but let us hope that the court is relatively compassionate with him. He's already suffered a great deal.
Well, I have you here, Mr. Kovrig. I want to get your thoughts on the Canada-China deal in itself as a whole. One of the main criticisms of this deal is that Canada can't trust China. What do you make of all of this?
I think one needs to understand that when you're dealing with a one-party authoritarian state like China, it's not about trust, realistically. What you can try to do is deepen understanding and a greater nuanced insight into the worldview of the Chinese Communist Party and how it makes decisions and how it's likely to react. And so that kind of familiarity can be built by senior Canadian officials like Prime Minister Carney meeting more frequently with their counterparts. It's not so much an exercise in building trust as it is in deepening knowledge and establishing mechanisms and, for example, for dialogue and negotiation that at least incentivize China to deal with Canada and manage relations with Canada through diplomatic means rather than taking hostages or putting trade sanctions on Canada, for example, or more coercive and aggressive measures. It's a means of trying to diffuse and manage coercion, but the coercion is always going to be there. And Canada, at the same time as managing that dialogue, needs to take increasingly robust measures to protect itself. That includes increased defense spending. It includes ramping up counterintelligence, efforts against foreign interference and transnational repression, and working more closely with like-minded countries and allies to try to constrain hostile behavior by the People's Republic of China.
All right, sir, that is our time. We will have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time today.